I knew something was off the moment I turned the corner onto my street and saw that beige Lexus SUV sitting in my driveway like it owned the place. I live in a quiet cul-de-sac in a suburban neighborhood just outside of Asheville, the kind of place where the grass is too green and everyone waves even though they secretly hate each other. I rolled to a stop in front of my house, cut the engine, and just stared at it. That wasn't my car, and it sure as hell wasn't parked there by accident. I got out of my truck and walked up the drive, already expecting trouble. Sure enough, there she was, Meredith Langford, the queen of the HOA and the neighborhood's reigning Karen. She was standing on her phone in my front yard, sunglasses on, clipboard in hand, talking loud enough for the neighbors to hear about violations and non-compliance. I just finished a 12-hour shift at the depot and I wasn't in the mood. "Excuse me," I said, keeping my voice even. "Any reason your car's in my driveway?" She didn't even look at me, just waved her hand like I was a waiter she was ignoring. "Just a minute," she said into the phone. "Yes, I'm at the Peterson property. The grass is cut but uneven. Yes, I'll mark it down as a visual nuisance." "Peterson? That's me. Victor Peterson. And I just mowed the lawn 2 days ago." I took a deep breath. "Meredith, move your car." She finally looked at me. "Victor, relax. It's just for a few minutes while I inspect the neighborhood. You weren't using the driveway anyway." I blinked. "That's not how private property works." She clicked her pen and scribbled something down. "You're a part of this community, Victor. That means shared responsibility. Besides, the HOA bylaws do give me certain access rights." "No," I said, stepping closer. "They don't. Not to my driveway. Not to my property. And not without notice." She gave this fake laugh like I just said something cute and uninformed. "Maybe you should reread the bylaws. You've missed a lot lately. Like your trash bins being out past collection." I stared at her. That was Tuesday. It had rained. Everyone's bins were out late. "And your mailbox paint is chipping." "I'll get right on that," I said flatly. "After you move your car." "Victor, don't be so dramatic. I'm doing my job." "No," I said, pulling my phone from my pocket. "You're trespassing." She rolled her eyes like I was the unreasonable one. "Fine. I'll move it when I'm done. I have 5 more houses to check." I didn't reply. I just walked back to my truck and unlocked the glove box. Inside was my private tow license, laminated and legit. Most folks don't realize you can get one in North Carolina if you own a certain type of property and meet several conditions, including paying a hefty fee and passing a state certification. I run a small side business towing illegally parked cars off commercial lots. Comes in handy when people forget how rules work. I made a quick call to my buddy Mason, who runs the local tow yard. I didn't need to explain much. He knew the HOA drama. Everyone did. "Be there in 10, he said. I hung up and leaned against the front of my truck, arms crossed, watching Meredith strut across my neighbor's lawn like she was inspecting a military base. Clipboard swinging, phone glued to her ear. She didn't even notice when Mason's truck rolled in. When the chains clanked and the lift tilted, that got her attention. "Wait, what are you doing?" she shrieked, running toward the driveway. "You can't tow my vehicle." Mason looked at me. I nodded. He kept going. Meredith's heels clicked on the pavement as she tried to wedge herself between the tow truck and her SUV. "I'm the HOA president," she yelled. "You can't do this." "I have authority." Mason grinned. "Doesn't override private tow authorization, ma'am. This is private residential property. He's got the license." He jerked a thumb at me. She turned to me, face red. "This is harassment. Abuse of power. I'll have you written up." "For what?" I said. "Enforcing my property rights?" She pointed a shaking finger at me. "You're going to regret this, Victor. I'll have the board review your entire property. Every inch. You'll be drowning in citations." "Try me," I said. "But next time, don't park in my driveway." Mason's truck pulled off, her Lexus bouncing slightly as it was hauled down the street. She stood there, stunned, gripping her clipboard like it was a weapon. "You'll pay for this," she muttered. I walked past her and up my steps. I already did. $200 for that private tow license. Best money I ever spent. I closed the door behind me, but I could hear her barking into her phone again, probably calling the vice president of the HOA, Carol something. They were always plotting something petty. I figured that was the end of it. I was wrong. That was just the beginning. 3 days passed before anything more than glares and whispers reached my front steps. Meredith's Lexus was back in her own driveway by nightfall that same day after, I imagine, a very uncomfortable and expensive retrieval from Mason's impound lot. I half expected her to back off after that. Maybe even learn something. I underestimated how far someone like her would go when their ego took a hit in public. It started with the mailbox. I came home Thursday night to find it ripped out of the ground and dumped sideways in the flower bed. No note. No explanation. Just a clean break at the base like someone had kicked it off in a fit. The post was splintered. The metal box crushed in on one side like it had been stomped hard. I checked my doorbell cam footage. Nothing. The camera's motion capture had been disabled. I hadn't noticed until now. Someone had physically pulled the wire from the side wall cleanly too, like they knew exactly where to grip and how much force to use without damaging the casing. So now I knew two things. They weren't just angry, they were careful. I filed a report with Buncombe County Sheriff's Office that night. Vandalism, tampering with residential equipment. The deputy was polite, but I could tell this wasn't going to be priority one. Could be kids, he said as he jotted notes on his pad. You didn't see who did it? Nope. But someone knew where my camera wire was. That's not a teenager with a baseball bat. That's someone with a plan. Anyone have a grudge against you? I just looked at him. He nodded slowly. Ah. Hoa. President. I'll log it. You should consider a backup camera system. Hardwired inside the house. I already had one. I just hadn't activated it yet. The next morning I installed the interior surveillance. Camera in the front window, one in the garage, and a third facing the backyard through the kitchen. All connected to my secured network, password protected, and backed up to cloud storage. I didn't just want footage, I wanted proof they couldn't erase. That weekend, I made a quiet visit to the county clerk's office. I requested a full copy of the HOA's articles of incorporation, board meeting minutes, and their fiscal disclosures. I had a hunch that if Meredith was this reckless over a parking dispute, she was probably sloppy elsewhere too. The clerk, an older woman with horn-rimmed glasses and a voice like gravel, handed me a stack of papers with a raised eyebrow. Planning to run for board? Something like that, I said. I spent the next few evenings combing through the documents. The budget reports were where things got interesting. Over the past 3 years, the HOA had reported an increasing administrative discretionary fund that had ballooned from under $2,000 to over $15,000. No detail on how it was being spent. No receipts. Just vague notations like community enhancement and aesthetic compliance. I cross-referenced the dates with board meetings. Most of them had no records of how those funds were approved. In fact, there were 3 months last year with no meeting minutes at all, yet expenses were listed. Now I was seeing it. This wasn't just a power trip. It was a scheme. Meredith was running the association like her personal piggy bank, and the other members were either too lazy or too scared to challenge her. I wasn't either of those things. On Monday, I submitted a formal request for the HOA's annual audit records. I knew they wouldn't have them. State law required associations of our size to perform one every fiscal year, but Meredith had clearly skipped it. I sent the request via certified mail. Return receipt required. That gave me a legal paper trail. Tuesday morning, a letter appeared on my front door. Not in the mailbox, a printed envelope taped to the glass. Inside was a notice of enforcement action. According to the letter, I had violated Section 14 Exterior Harmony and Neighborhood Standards by failing to maintain a uniform mailbox structure in compliance with community design. I had 72 hours to replace it or face a fine of $100 per day. I laughed. They destroyed my mailbox and were now fining me for not having one. I didn't respond. Instead, I documented everything: photos, timestamps, and a video of me reading the letter aloud while showing the damage. Then I forwarded the footage and my prior police report to a property rights attorney in Charlotte. Her name was Claire Duval, a former litigator who now specialized in HOA abuse cases. We spoke that evening on a secure line. "Victor, I've seen this before," she said. "They're trying to manufacture violations to push you into submission. It's classic retaliation. But if they've skipped audits and misused funds, that's a different ballgame. What's my play? For now, don't replace the mailbox. Let them issue the fines. It strengthens the retaliation claim. Meanwhile, I'm filing a motion to compel financial disclosures under North Carolina's Planned Community Act. If they refuse, we escalate." The next day, 2 more letters showed up, one citing unapproved surveillance equipment visible from the front lawn and another accusing me of hostile behavior toward board members. That one made me laugh harder than the mailbox ultimatum. I started a log. I documented each letter, each timestamp, and every interaction. Then I printed copies and slipped them into a binder marked HOA Legal. That Friday, Claire filed the motion in district court. It triggered a mandatory 30-day response window for the HOA to produce their financial statements, board minutes, and any records related to fines issued to my property. If they failed to comply, the judge could issue a subpoena, and if they falsified anything, criminal charges could follow. That afternoon, Meredith showed up again. Not on my property this time. She parked across the street, got out wearing a blue windbreaker and holding her ever-present clipboard. She didn't approach, just stood there, tapping her pen, watching me as I watered the front hedge. I ignored her. After 10 minutes, she walked off. That night, someone dumped a pile of shredded paper across my front lawn. Hundreds of tiny strips fluttering in the breeze. I collected them all, bagged them, and placed the bag in my freezer. If it came to it, I'd have them reassembled. The next morning, my neighbor Greg stopped me as I was getting into my truck. "Hey, Vic," he said, lowering his voice. "You might want to know something. Carol, she's on the board, told my wife that Meredith's planning to push for a lien on your property." I turned, fully facing him. "For what?" "She says you've racked up over 900 in fines. Mailbox, cameras, some weed height thing she made up. They're gonna vote on it next week. Thanks for the heads up." Greg hesitated. "Look, I don't agree with her. But be careful. She's got people in her pocket." "I've got my own pocket," I said. "And mine has lawyers." That weekend, I hosted a cookout. I invited every single neighbor on the block. Some came out of curiosity, others for the free beer and ribs. I didn't mention the HOA. I didn't need to. They all brought it up themselves. "She fined me for a dented garage door," one guy said. "3 letters in 1 week because my porch light was too bright," said another. By the end of the night, I had 15 signatures, neighbors willing to testify or submit statements about Meredith's abuse of power. I sent copies to Claire. We were building something. A timeline, pattern, evidence. And soon we'd have everything we needed. Because what Meredith didn't know was that Claire had just received a court date. And once discovery began, the paper trail she thought was buried was going to see daylight. By the time the court date was locked in, I'd stopped reacting to the passive-aggressive nonsense the HOA kept throwing at me. Every day felt like a new attempt to provoke me into slipping up trash bags torn open and scattered near my mailbox. Anonymous calls to the city claiming I was running a business from my garage. Even a bogus pest control notice posted on my front door claiming termites had been spotted on my property. I didn't bother taking it down, I just added it to the evidence board in my garage. Claire had arranged for a forensic accountant out of Raleigh to comb through the HOA's financials once discovery opened. She warned me it could take weeks, maybe months, to get real answers. What neither of us expected was how fast things would unravel. On the second Tuesday of the month, a plain envelope showed up in my mailbox. No return address. Inside was a single flash drive. No note. No explanation. I scanned it with a clean laptop I kept offline just in case it was a trap and opened the only file on it. A folder of scanned documents, all dated, all signed, and all damning. I stared at the screen as line after line of fake invoice entries filled the monitor. Payments to non-existent contractors, inflated landscaping costs for work that hadn't been done, and one payment marked security consultation for over $4,000 signed off by Meredith and another board member, Dean Caffrey. I called Claire immediately. "Victor," she said after I'd explained what I'd found, "you need to copy that drive and bring it to the sheriff's office. This isn't just mismanagement anymore. This is fraud." I made 2 encrypted backups that night and drove one over to the county sheriff's department the following morning. I asked for Detective Ralston, an economic crimes guy Claire knew from a prior case. Older, quiet type with a salt and pepper beard and a voice that never rose above a tired growl. He didn't waste time on small talk. "These look authentic," he said, flipping through the printed copies I'd brought. "If they are, you're looking at felony embezzlement, possibly conspiracy. Anyone else on this board you trust?" "Not a single one," I said. He folded the paper and slid it into a case file. "We'll need a formal complaint to open an investigation. You willing to sign one? I've got a pen in my pocket." A week later, 3 patrol cars rolled into the neighborhood just after noon. No sirens, no fanfare. Just a quiet knock on Meredith's door followed by a calm, professional conversation on the porch. She didn't protest, not loudly, anyway, but her eyes locked on mine as they walked her to the car. There was no shouting, no dramatic scene, just that look, wide-eyed, confused, and suddenly very aware that the rules had changed. The HOA tried to spin it, of course. 2 days after the arrest, a notice was posted on the community board outside the clubhouse. "Interim leadership transition," it read, signed by Vice President Carol Delaney. No mention of the investigation. No explanation. Just a thin layer of corporate-sounding nonsense meant to smooth over what couldn't be ignored. But people weren't buying it. I could see it in the way neighbors started asking questions, real ones. Not the usual whispers about lawn height or fence paint, but actual concerns about where their dues had gone and why nobody had ever seen a full accounting of expenses. At Claire's suggestion, I filed a motion to halt all fines and enforcement actions from the HOA until the financial investigation concluded. The judge granted it with minimal resistance. That meant no more letters, no more threats, and no more schemes from the remaining board members, at least not legally. That didn't stop them from trying other routes. One night, just after 11, I heard a noise outside, soft, like paper sliding against wood. I grabbed the flashlight and checked the porch. Nothing there. Then I spotted it. A plastic bag hanging from the latch on my side gate. Inside was a stack of printed screenshots, emails, mostly. Conversations between Meredith and someone labeled only as CD. I recognized the initials. Carol Delaney. The emails were dated over the previous 6 months and included discussions about keeping Victor isolated, disqualifying him through nuisance violations, and most disturbingly a plan to encourage noncompliance through strategic ambiguity. I showed the emails to Claire the next morning. "This is conspiracy," she said, "between board members. If we can verify these, it opens up a whole new layer of liability." "How do we verify them?" She already had an answer. "Metadata analysis. I'll send them to our tech guy. If they check out, we submit them as evidence in the fraud case and open a civil suit." It felt surreal watching what started as a petty parking dispute escalate into a courtroom-worthy scandal. But as the evidence mounted, so did the pressure. Carol and Dean tried to paint themselves as uninvolved, claiming Meredith had acted alone. But the paper trail said otherwise. At the next community meeting, held in the clubhouse under temporary board control, I showed up early and took a seat in the front row. I didn't say anything. I didn't have to. By then, word had spread. People had seen the patrol cars. They'd heard about the court filings. And they were angry not just at the board, but at themselves for letting it go on so long. Carol stepped up to the microphone wearing a blazer 3 sizes too formal for a neighborhood gathering. Her voice trembled slightly as she read from a pre-written statement. In light of recent allegations, we are cooperating fully with the ongoing investigation. The board remains committed to transparency and fairness. I raised my hand. She paused. Yes, Mr. Peterson? How much was spent on security consultations last year? She blinked. I don't have that number in front of me. Because I do, I said, pulling a printout from my folder. $4,860. Signed by you and Meredith. No receipt. No contractor listing. No approval minutes. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Carol tried to recover. That matter is part of the investigation. I can't comment. You just did. Another neighbor stood. Then another. People started asking questions, real ones. Demanding answers. And the board, for once, had nothing to say. By the end of the meeting, 5 residents had filed motions to recall the entire board. Claire had anticipated this and drawn up a petition form. I handed out copies in the parking lot. By the time I got home, I had over 20 signatures. That night, I got a call from Greg, the same neighbor who'd warned me about the lien. They're cleaning out the HOA office, he said. Carol and Dean, shredding papers, hauling out file boxes. I texted Claire. 10 minutes later, she was on the phone with Detective Ralston. An hour after that, a warrant was issued to preserve HOA records. Deputies arrived just in time to stop Dean from loading the last of the boxes into his SUV. Inside one of those boxes, a ledger, handwritten, with notes that didn't appear anywhere in the official records. Transactions labeled off-record, personal reimbursement, and one entry that read simply, driveway incident fallout preemptive strike. Next to it, a payment to a private investigator. Claire had it analyzed. The PI was real, and he'd been paid to dig into my background. Bank accounts, work history, even a scan of my property's title. They had been planning to fabricate a claim that I'd illegally modified my driveway to create a second business entrance, completely false, but clever enough to be plausible if they hadn't been caught first. By the time the investigation wrapped, Meredith had been charged with embezzlement, obstruction, and conspiracy to commit fraud. Carol and Dean were named as co-conspirators in the civil suit and faced criminal charges for tampering with records and attempting to destroy evidence. The HOA was dissolved by court order 3 weeks later. A temporary oversight committee was formed by the county until the neighborhood could vote on whether to form a new association or live without one. So far, the vote was leaning hard toward the latter. I never expected a parked car to unravel a web of corruption. But when people push too far, when they think rules don't apply to them, they forget that some of us keep receipts. And some of us know exactly where to send them. The final collapse came faster than I expected. Once the county disbanded the HOA and the lawsuit shifted from civil to criminal territory, the entire neighborhood was in limbo. The signs were subtle at first. The official notices stopped appearing on doors. The neighborhood patrol car, a leased security vehicle paid for with association dues, vanished overnight. And the clubhouse bulletin board that once overflowed with Meredith's printed edicts now sat empty, sun-bleached, and ignored. But the real change came when the district attorney's office got involved. Claire had passed the ledgers and flash drive contents along to the assistant DA, who confirmed what we'd feared. Meredith, Carol, and Dean hadn't just misused funds, they'd laundered them. The phony security consultation? That money had been funneled through a shell company, one that was traced back to Dean's brother-in-law. The trail was ugly, crossing into wire fraud, falsified tax filings, and interstate financial crimes. It was no longer a neighborhood drama. It was a federal case. I was subpoenaed as a primary witness. The court date was set for early spring. In the weeks leading up to it, I kept my head down. The neighborhood was tense, but in a different way now. Quiet. Cautious. People weren't just angry, they were watchful. No one knew how deep the rot had gone or whether there were others involved who hadn't yet been exposed. The HOA had been the perfect shield for people like Meredith: unchecked power, vague rules, and access to money no one ever questioned. But that shield was gone now. On the first day of trial, I sat in the front row of the gallery, wearing my best jacket, a folder of documents on my lap. Claire sat beside me. Across the room, Meredith looked like a ghost of herself, hair pulled back tight, lips pressed thin, eyes scanning the floor like the truth might be hiding under her shoes. Dean sat beside her, jaw clenched, fingers twitching. Carol was absent. She had flipped on them the week before, cutting a deal with the DA in exchange for testimony. When she walked into the courtroom, Meredith's expression didn't change, but Dean's did. He turned toward her slowly like something had just hit him he didn't see coming. On the stand, Carol admitted everything. She detailed how Meredith had proposed the budget alterations under the guise of modernizing enforcement, how Dean had suggested filtering payments through a contractor for plausible deniability, how they'd used HOA funds to pay for personal expenses, Meredith's glass sunroom, Dean's backyard patio, even a private weekend retreat for board strategy planning that turned out to be a beach rental in Wilmington. When my turn came, I laid out the timeline. From the day I found her SUV in my driveway to the night I received the anonymous flash drive. Claire had prepared me for every question, but I didn't need a script. I had lived every minute of it. I described the retaliation, the fabricated violations, the destroyed mailbox, the shredded documents. And when I ended with the discovery of the PI hired to dig into my background, there wasn't a single person in the courtroom still looking at Meredith with anything but disgust. After 3 days of testimony, the verdict came back. Guilty on all counts. Meredith was sentenced to 6 years in a federal facility with a minimum of 3 before parole eligibility. Dean received 4 years. Part of Carol's plea deal included a suspended sentence and a 5-year ban from serving on any residential board or association in the state. It wasn't just a legal victory. It was a message. Back in the neighborhood, things shifted. A new kind of order emerged, not the rigid, fear-based control Meredith had imposed, but a quiet consensus among residents who no longer wanted to be ruled. The county allowed the neighborhood to vote on whether to reinstate an HOA under new leadership or dissolve it permanently. The vote was nearly unanimous. No more HOA. Without Meredith's regime, people began handling things differently. The guy with the crooked garage door fixed it himself, and no one complained that it took 2 weeks. The couple with the too bright porch light set up motion sensors instead. Even the lawn standards relaxed. People planted what they liked. Some even put little signs in their yards, "Free neighborhood. No president." Greg stopped by one evening as I was sealing a new mailbox post into the ground. A sturdier one. Reinforced steel. I figured I'd earned a little overkill. "You hear about the auction?" he asked, leaning on his bike. "What auction?" "They're liquidating all the HOA's assets. County ordered it. Everything that wasn't tied up in the investigation, furniture, files, even that stupid golf cart Meredith used." I raised an eyebrow. "You thinking of bidding?" He laughed. "What would I do with a golf cart?" I shrugged. "Start your own patrol, maybe. Greg's community watch." He chuckled again. "Nah, I think we've all had enough of patrols. That weekend I put up a new fence around the backyard. No permit required now. I installed the last panel myself. As I stepped back to admire it, something caught my eye, a small envelope stuck in the slats of the gate. No name, just a folded note inside. It was a thank you. No signature, just a shorthand written message for standing up when we didn't know how. I kept it. Taped it inside the binder I'd used to track every violation, every letter, every piece of evidence. I never found out who sent it, but I didn't need to. The neighborhood was different now. Not perfect, but freer. More human. And as for my private tow license, I renewed it the following month. Not because I expected anyone else to try me, but because keeping it felt like a quiet reminder that sometimes the best defense is being prepared, especially when someone decides your driveway is theirs. That beige Lexus never came back. Neither did Meredith. And the space in front of my house? It stayed empty, just the way I liked it.